From the gridiron to the hardwood, James Meche breaks it all down. It's time for another episode of Cleats and Sneaks.
The injuries for the New Orleans Saints have already started to stack up, and we're still only in May in OTAs. What a time to be alive. Welcome into another edition of Cleats and Sneaks, the podcast where we talk about everything going on in the NFL and in the NBA. Of course, with the NBA, we're halfway into finding out who's going to be in the NBA Finals, as we already know that the Boston Celtics were able to sweep the Indiana Pacers and move on. But we're about to head into Game 5 with the Western Conference Finals, as the Timberwolves were able to avoid a sweep themselves and get the 105-100 win over the Dallas Mavericks and take it back to their home court, hopefully to extend it to at least Game 6 to send it back to Dallas. For that one, we'll have to see. By that point, we'll find out who's going to be in the finals in this next edition of Cleats and Sneaks. But until then, let's kind of look at what's going on in the NFL right now. And there's not too much going on. It's a little bit more of the quiet part of the offseason as rookies are still trying to get acclimated. We're, like I said, currently in OTA, so it's a lot more voluntary stuff for the vets themselves. So not a lot going on. But for the New Orleans Saints, there's definitely a little bit to talk about right now, as there is now another injury that we had recently found out about for them, more specifically with the defensive line. Of course, going back to earlier in the offseason when the Saints had first signed Chase Young, they were able to get him on a relatively cheap deal, but then we had found out that he had a neck injury and he was having neck surgery, so that was going to hold him out for a majority of the offseason. So that's already chalk up one injury towards the defensive line, and we're already getting a little bit of a roll going now that we had found out as well that Tanoh Kpassagnon, the veteran defensive end / edge rusher for the Saints, he had actually tore his Achilles earlier in the offseason. And it was interesting because Dennis Allen, he had mentioned it in a recent press conference during OTAs after a practice that he's a little bit indefinite when it comes to the timeline. So it seems like there's a little bit of optimism that Tanoh could actually come back at some point during the season. Now, usually with Achilles injuries, it takes about a year. It's kind of the same thing with an ACL injury where you need to basically hit a full calendar year for the most part before you're able to come back. But we have seen other players like Cam Akers who would come back as soon as 6 months after the injury. But as of right now, if you're looking at it, if he had injured it a couple weeks ago in May, 6 months down the line, you're looking at November. So you're looking at the back half of the season. But that's getting super optimistic. I would say because there's not a lot of information based off of what had happened with Tanoh in the injury itself, I would say it happened very early in the offseason, probably during the playoffs. So you're looking at late January, early February, maybe even late February itself after the Super Bowl and once you're getting around to the new league year starting. So at that point, you're looking at 6 months down the line as soon as August, but that's being super optimistic. I would say if Tanoh is to come back and actually play for the Saints in the 2024-2025 offseason itself, I would think it would have to be during late part of November, early part of December. And to me, that's still even being very optimistic when it's all said and done. Because when you look at the rest of the Saints on the defensive line, sure, there's a lot of unproven, but also a lot of veteran guys. But you still have Cam Jordan under contract. You just extended Carl Granderson. Like I said, you signed Chase Young, but then you've got a couple of other guys that you need to see. Are they going to be able to make the team, and are they going to be able to have an impact for the foreseeable future? Isaiah Foskey, he was drafted in the second round of last year's draft, and then a couple of years before that, the Saints drafted Peyton Turner with their first round pick. So there's a lot of bodies going on right now in that defensive end and defensive line room, and that's not even including the interior of the defensive line. Of course, they still have Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard, Brian Brzee, and of course, Christian Boyd, who they got late in this last draft that had happened just about a month ago at this point. But because of that, it makes me worry that Tanoh might not even be on the team altogether. I'm very skeptical at this point because Carl Granderson, he just signed the extension, so he's locked up. There's no worry about him maybe or maybe not making the team. Peyton Turner, he didn't get his 5th-year option, but this is more of a prove-it year as he gets into year 4. Isaiah Foskey, he was a healthy scratch for a lot of the 2023 season for the Saints. So those guys have a lot to prove. Carl Granderson, he's locked up. Cam Jordan, you're not going to cut him. He also recently had an extension himself. And then you just signed Chase Young. So the thing for me is the fact that the Saints, the way they usually like to formulate their defensive line room is they like to go with 9 guys usually. So you're looking at 4 interior defensive linemen. And if you had to put odds on it all, you would probably say Nathan Shepard, Colin Saunders, and Brian Bresee are locks at this point in time. So that's 3 right there. That's 33% of the defensive line that we would assume the total numbers would be at. So if that's the case, 4 for the interior, 5 for the exterior, for the edge rushers themselves. And I just mentioned 5 themselves: Cam, Carl, Chase, Peyton, and Isaiah. To me, Tanoh is more of the odd man out when it's all said and done, because when you see him, yes, he's been able to be someone that has been more of a rotational piece, and he's a former Kansas City Chief. And based off of what we've seen over the last couple of years, Kansas City Chiefs going from there to New Orleans has been a mainstay. So it looks like the Saints are trying to build up a sort of type of winning culture by getting guys that have already done it all. But the fact that you look at this, and Tanoh's in a contract year, he has got 3 void years in 2025, 2026, and 2027, but he's looking to be an unrestricted free agent in 2025. The fact that the cap hit is only $3.3 million, and then the dead cap, if they were to move on from Tanoh, is less than 3. So to me, as I look at it, Tanoh already wasn't in a great spot to make the roster, but now that we have gotten into it, and now that we see that he's got an injury, and it's a big one, it's not like it's a hamstring injury or it's a finger injury that maybe linger, but that shouldn't hold him out for too long, because he's got an Achilles injury, a torn Achilles, that is going to take him out for at least half of the year. And optimistically, he wouldn't be back until during the season, and probably until the latter half. I think because of the fact of the contract, plus the injury, plus the fact that you have a bunch of other bodies at the moment. Now, of course, there always could be an injury that happens during training camp or mini camp that maybe the Saints are looking for another body to be able to be that 5th rotational piece along the edge rusher side of the football on the defensive side. Because you kind of already have all your guys, there's not a lot of room for competition. Sure, you could bring in a couple of other camp bodies since Tanoh isn't going to be available for you, but to me, it seems like the defensive line is already, for the most part, locked down. You just have the one piece that you need to figure out who's going to be your 4th interior defensive lineman, who's going to be your defensive tackle for the most part. There's a couple of guys. I feel like Christian Boyd, of them all, it would have to be him, since he was already drafted by the Saints. It's not like he was a UDFA. Now, they do have a couple of guys at the moment, like Jack Heflin, who we had seen before last year, and then Kendall Vickers and Kyler Boff. But for the most part, I think you would have to go and give Boyd the nod, since you use draft capital on him. It's not a guarantee, but it seems like he's already got the advantage compared to the other guys. So I think as you look at the Saints defensive line, you, for the most part, already have it solved. And I thought Tanoh was one guy that was going to be the odd man out because of the injury. It seems like he is for sure going to be out, and he very easily could be cut before the season starts. We'll just have to wait and see. And appreciate you listening in to another edition of Cleats and Sneaks. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, ESPN_SWLA, and also check out the latest blogs and gamers that we have on ESPN SouthwestLouisiana.com. Of course, it's regional time coming up this weekend, so you know we have the Louisiana Raging Cajuns and the LSU Tigers coming up. But of course, we also talk about those Houston Astros. And for next week's edition of Cleats and Sneaks, we'll be looking at a preview of the NBA Finals. But until then, appreciate you listening in, and I'll talk to you next time.